Good morning. Thank you. I appreciate that, the Southern hospitality. We're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome everyone to the next panel, which is titled Meet the Funders. I am Torend Collins. I'm the Regional Intergovernmental and External Affairs Specialist for Appalachia. Say that 10 times fast. I am based in Washington, D.C., and I have the pleasure of being the regional specialist working with the great folks in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I will also say I am a native Kentuckian. I'm from Louisville, so it's very exciting to be back home in the state. And also, when I was in law school, I did an externship with EEC with lawyers. So it's nice to come full circle, I would say. And it's a pleasure, and thank you, Secretary Goodman and Governor Beshear and all the other staff that have helped prepare this wonderful conference. I greatly appreciate you all allowing me to come and speak briefly amongst guests here and also with these fantastic folks on my panel, on our panel, excuse me. So I want to go ahead and get started. I'll just introduce our panel. Each of us will have some slides and presentations. We'll do that for about 10 minutes roughly, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'll start immediately to my left. This is Brian Gross. He's the environmental scientist from EPA Region 4 Brownfields. And followed next to Brian is Sandy Williams. She's the executive director of Kentucky Infrastructure Authority. And then we've got James Jim Cable, who is the environmental scientist consultant, the Division of Abandoned Mine Lands. And lastly, we have Dennis Hatfield, the director in the Division of Oil and Gas. So please welcome our panelists, and we'll go ahead and get started. So, do I have it right? Are they showing up on the screen? Nope. They're advancing down here. There we go. All right. Again, I already introduced myself, regional specialist for Appalachia, and I just want to let you know the states that I cover. I cover the Commonwealth as well as Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and West Virginia. I'm also covering a few other states that are not within Appalachia, or is categorized by the Department of Energy. That includes Virginia, Maryland, Florida, which is funny, and also North Carolina. So we're a small but mighty team of 6. We have our places throughout the country, and we're really serving as collaborators, conveners, and connectors to the Department of Energy, really assisting the Secretary and having a more granular connection and focus on what are the needs of the communities that we serve, from state energy offices to governor's offices, to ensure that you are aware and cognizant and connected with our colleagues that are implementing this historic funding that's coming down from the department. So I just wanted to flag, just with this slide, the framework behind our priorities. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, IIJA, our bills, as referenced many times, and the Inflation Reduction Act, our Investments Congress has charged the U.S. Department of Energy with delivering by directly partnering with states like yourselves, local governments, industry, academia, and utilities and other stakeholders. And really, we want to use this this funding and these opportunities to turn the threat of climate change to an opportunity that can revitalize our energy and manufacturing sectors, which is creating high quality, good paying jobs, and addressing historic environmental injustices and inequities throughout our states. So it's really important for this administration to use the funding to help support the work that you're doing locally and the work that the president has put forward. And I also wanted to just start off with our focus on the primary elements of Justice 40. Some of you all may be fairly familiar with Justice 40. For those of you who are not, it is the goal of Justice 40 to use these investments, or at least a substantial portion of them, to improve financial, social, and environmental outcomes in communities, particularly marginalized communities and those at risk of getting left behind in this clean energy revolution. So when we mean historically disadvantaged communities, those are like the ones that are next to polluting power plants that have long struggled under higher disease burden, And that also includes energy communities that have powered the country through more traditional energy resources like coal, oil, and gas. And that could still have a place in the energy industries on the other side of this transition. So Justice 40 is really about having 40% of those overall benefits of certain federal investments just poured into those disadvantaged communities. And at the Department of Energy, we're working hard through my positioning as a regional specialist and with my colleagues across the department to ensure that those voices are heard and those stakeholders are present in all the conversations and have all the means and needs to really participate and take advantage of funding. And so here, I'm pretty sure these slides will be shared, but I wanted to provide just a number of resources that you could utilize after this conference that you can look into and that you can share with your stakeholders. And there will be many more conversations as our leadership in the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, who is spearheading and doing a lot of the Justice 40 work across DOE, will have forthcoming as we continue to move forward with bill implementation and IRA implementation as well. So I just want to touch on the fun topics that I've heard when I'm engaging with stakeholders around funding, distribution, and implementation. And really, the bill is a once-in-a-generation legislative effort to rebuild this country's infrastructure. So it is a huge, monumental task and a behemoth that DOE is taking on. And it will take a lot of support from you all, from each of the stakeholders in this room to help us ensure that we are being ensure that we are being as smart as we can with the funding that we have, because this is going to impact many generations to come. So we want to make sure that we get it right, and having each one of you participate is going to be essential to achieving that goal. And so for the next few slides, I just want to put out some numbers and some information. Our fellow panelists earlier spoke about having numbers on hand, and they're very important. So I may be reading a few from the paper, but as of July, $1.9 billion in bipartisan infrastructure law funding has been announced and is headed to Kentucky with over 79 specific projects identified for funding. So it's really crucial that at the Department of Energy, the Secretary says that we're a solutions agency. So it's important that we use this money to really address the issues and challenges, and also to provide the solutions. And so this historic money is going to be instrumental and critical to us achieving those goals. And also just wanted to highlight that the bill is delivering for Kentucky when it comes to clean energy and power. It makes an historic investment in updating our power and infrastructure. And I highlight the funding to date with the Weatherization Assistance Program, which has roughly $5 million has been allocated to Kentucky in 2022 for weatherization. And if you're not familiar with that, that's increasing energy efficiency in residential homes and other dwellings. And then also earlier, someone spoke to grid resilience, have roughly $5.6 million to help prevent outages and make the power grid more resilient. And so both of these initiatives will provide Kentucky with the funding needed to improve energy efficiency in residential and commercial dwellings, as I said earlier, and to help make the power grid more resilient. And also, I just wanted to highlight on this slide, when we're talking about resilience, as was stated earlier by Secretary Goodman, Kentucky has experienced devastating tornadoes in western Kentucky and historic flooding in southeast Kentucky. And so building out the infrastructure is key to helping Kentucky move forward. The bill makes the largest investments in the resilience of physical and natural infrastructure in American history, and hardening our infrastructure against 21st century threats and making our communities safer. So this slide just represents some of that announced funding to date, the $488 million that's been allotted to Kentucky, and some of the other funding opportunities that are available. And I think this is going to be instrumental as the Commonwealth builds out its plan for resilience and for also having opportunities for legacy pollution cleanup. And I just wanted to highlight Bill and its work that it's doing to invest in electric vehicle charging. I know Governor Beshear spoke to that briefly in his opening comments. And it really is going to be instrumental to providing the connectivity that is needed, not just with the infrastructure, but also the production of batteries within the state. And so announced to date, Kentucky has been allocated $10 million in 2022 with the approved state electric vehicle charging plan. And if you haven't already investigated or looked at the DOE/DOT Office of Energy and Transportation, please do so. There are a lot of resources on that website. I know there are representatives from each state that are working with the NEVI plans, but it's a great resource and can provide a lot of information about funding opportunities to continue investment in the EV infrastructure. And lastly with Bill, I just wanted to highlight a new office, the Office of State and Community Engagement Programs at DOE. It's going to be really instrumental to helping facilitate connectivity to funding opportunities at the state and local level. This is being spearheaded by my colleague, Dr. Henry McCoy, and it's going to be a great resource, and our team is working in tandem with theirs to ensure that you all are getting all the information you need about funding. The weatherization program, the state energy program is going to be corralled through their office now, so it's just another great resource and touch point to have at DOE. And here are some additional resources. And I'll slide these. You can all see this presentation afterward. And these are all about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And we do have access to all the funding opportunities on our website, and those are listed as they come out. So I know implementation and timeline has been critical and key to folks, but this is a great resource, and I please ask that you sign up for any email updates to have the most information as possible. And lastly, in the last few slides, because I know I'm out of time, I just wanted to highlight the Inflation Reduction Act. It's going to lower energy costs. IRA, or IRA as we call it, is really the opportunity to combine the funding with what's going on with Bill to really make instrumental change and historic investments as we continue to combat climate change and address our energy infrastructure. A few things on this slide is how we're going to build the clean energy economy and reduce harmful pollution. And then also a fact sheet, which I won't go through now because I know I'm a little short on time, but it really is going to be a tremendous investment, not only for the Commonwealth, but for all others throughout the U.S. And here are a few resources in case you're interested. There are a lot there. Please take your time to go through those. And lastly, a slide about our team. Please do connect. I have my contact information there and then our general email. And with that, we have any questions, we'll have a Q&A afterward. And also, I'm happy to chat after this panel concludes. But thank you for your time, and I'll pass it over to Brian.
All right, thank you everybody for coming today to this conference. My name is Brian Gross. I'm a Brownfields project officer. I work with the Environmental Protection Agency in our Region 4 office, which is the Southeast region. Our office is in Atlanta, Georgia, and we cover 8 states in our region, and Kentucky are about the northernmost tip of our region. So it also includes every place south and east of here. Commissioner Hatton covered brownfields a little bit this morning. I was going to start by just talking about what a brownfield is, and it can really mean a lot of different things, but a term I picked up that I liked from a gentleman named Herb Pettigene, who used to work for the Kentucky State Program. He called them bad buildings, BAD, blighted, abandoned, dilapidated, any kind of site that used to be used and now is no longer being used to its potential. So that's the kind of site we look at in the Brownfields program. It can be anything from old office buildings and gas stations all the way up to like larger sites like wood treaters and mine sites and that kind of thing. So these are present in most communities, and the goal of our program is to provide funding to do the environmental work to help communities address those properties that either they have concerns about or they have a vision to reuse it or turn it back into something productive. So the goal of our program is to do the environmental work up front to try and get those projects off the ground and help push them towards a reuse and a redevelopment that is going to be useful for those communities. We're very proud of the fact that by doing that, we can attract private investment, private development. We measure that by dollars leveraged, and we're proud to say that for each dollar in EPA grant funding, that is followed by an average of $15 in private funding. Now, of course, that's asymmetrical. There's big $100 million projects and some that don't happen, but as a trend, we're very proud of that number. I'll talk about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law just for a minute and how it is affecting our program. He did have the numbers right. It's $1.5 billion over the next 5 years. We're kind of in the first year of those 5. This table here just kind of shows what is traditionally funded by Congress and how that is being supplemented by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So we kind of work this on 2 tracks. The bottom one, 128A, is for our states and tribes. So they run voluntary cleanup programs and oversee that type of operation. And with the bill funding, it's going to allow them to be a little bit more flexible. So we're starting to see some creative ideas come through there, but we're still kind of early on in that process, and each state has different focuses on what they want to use that for. Everything else, most of the bread and butter of our program is giving grants to local communities to do site assessment, site testing, and site cleanup work. So those are done through a competitive grant process that comes out every year. It's actually open right now, but if you're interested in applying and can't make it this year, it happens every year, so don't worry. And we also have programs with direct technical assistance to communities to do planning, identify other resources that they might need. And then we have a program called Targeted Brownfield Assessment, which is more for kind of one-off sites that need assessment work. And that's done out of our office. We have some engineering firms that we work with that will do that work at the request of communities. So all of that is being expanded with Bill, but that's kind of the general setup of our program. And this is my last slide, just kind of the grants that we offer. You guys may be familiar with these, but the most common one, at least in the Southeast, has always been community-wide assessment. That's where communities, meaning cities, counties, states, development districts, and nonprofit organizations can apply for money to do assessment work on a community-wide basis, meaning as many sites as they can fit into their budget. The beauty of this program is that it can be done on privately held sites, so they can work with property owners who are interested in selling their sites or developers that are interested in buying sites. It's a voluntary program. It's not an enforcement program. So that is, up to the property owner ultimately. But the grant recipients do not actually have to own the sites for assessment. Now they do for cleanup, and that is being ramped up with this year's funding. It's a little bit more of an emphasis. For cleanup sites, you do have to own the property, and of course, once you've done the testing, whether that was on your own or from an assessment grant, and you know that there's some contamination there, the cleanup grant can come in and help you implement the correct controls to get your site ready for reuse, whether it's removal or putting a cap on it or something else. We're a land-based program, so that's primarily what we deal with. And the revolving loan fund is also a cleanup program, and multipurpose is a blend of assessment and cleanup funding. So those are kind of the grants that we offer. The mix is a little different every year. This year, all of them are on the table. The due date I have here at the bottom, November 22nd. And let's see, I think I might have one more. Well, it's not on the slide. But the other big change is that for cleanup and revolving loan fund, there is no longer a cost share under those. In the past, to apply for cleanup, you had to match 20% of the amount you were applying for. That has been waived for all grants this year, and I believe it's going to continue to be the case for all bipartisan infrastructure law projects. So that's an important change if you have not heard about that. And that's what I had. So if you have any questions on the federal Brownfields program, please feel free to ask me, and I will let you know. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Sandy.
Good morning. I would like to thank Governor Beshear and Secretary Goodman for the invitation to come and speak with you all today and talk a little bit about the historic amount of funding that will be coming through the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law through our existing clean water and drinking water state revolving fund programs. Those two programs will receive approximately $630 million over the next 5 years to fund water and sewer projects. Some of the key priorities of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that I wanted to touch on today are the increased investment in disadvantaged communities, addressing PFAS and emerging contaminants, lead service line replacement, and cultivating domestic preference manufacturing. You can see, again, over the next 5 years, the specific categories of funding available through each of the clean water and drinking water programs. These are new, and in addition to the annual funding that is received by the Commonwealth for these environmental programs. So what is an SRF? A state revolving fund loan program. We act like a bank. So the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority will make loans to municipal utilities and other types of utilities to fund sewer and water projects. Focusing specifically on the clean water SRF and bill, the majority of the funding available will be for projects that qualify, that are eligible for the regular clean water SRF program. And there's a small piece that must be specifically to address emerging contaminants in wastewater systems. And there are some additional principal forgiveness sections that are available in these new funding pools. So for federal fiscal year 22, you can see that Kentucky will receive, with the existing and bill funding, about $38.5 million, with a little over $15 million being provided as principal forgiveness. Who's eligible? That's defined in our statute. It must be a governmental entity, and here you can see some examples of those types of governmental entities that are eligible to apply for loan funding. Traditional projects are eligible under this funding source: construction of publicly owned treatment works, but also stormwater planning, and something new this year, technical assistance. To be eligible for the emerging contaminants piece of funding, it's probably easier to say what isn't eligible. If it's currently regulated, it isn't eligible. Looking at now the drinking water state revolving fund program, there are two new categories: lead service line replacement and emerging contaminants provided, that bill has provided funding for. And then part of the funding is also eligible for any eligible drinking water state revolving fund program. And again, there's principal forgiveness attached to this new piece of funding as well on the drinking water side. For federal fiscal year 22, you can see with the base program and the three new categories, we'll have just over $100 million of available funding on the drinking water side, with $38 million of that funding being provided as an estimate for principal forgiveness. The same eligible borrowers as were with the clean water side are also on the drinking water side. Any eligible governmental agency, and you can see some examples of those. Our definition was recently changed to also include water associations. So that's something that was new with this most recent session of the General Assembly. Again, traditional drinking water treatment plant projects, planning and design, And here you can see the types of funding that are eligible under the regular clean water, drinking water SRF program. To be eligible for the emerging contaminants piece of funding, the contaminant has to be listed on EPA's contaminant candidate list. And basically, if it's already regulated, it probably isn't eligible. To be eligible, or the eligibilities for lead service line replacement, the funding can be used to produce lead service line inventories, as well as the removal and replacement of those lead service lines. However, if you do use the funding to replace the service line, it has to be used to replace the service line both on the public and private side of the meter. In looking at increasing investment in disadvantaged communities, 49% of the funding must go to disadvantaged communities for the drinking water and clean water supplemental and lead service line funding available through bill. And at least 25% must go to disadvantaged communities or public water systems serving less than 25,000 people. The funding does allow each state to set its own definition, and we are looking at our definition to make it as inclusive as possible. The loan programs at the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority, we have two. We call them Fund A and Fund F because saying Clean Water State Revolving Fund 10 times fast is not good. We have interest rates that range from 0.5% to 2.25% based on the median household income of the water system being served. Our terms are typically 20 years, but we can go up to 30 years. In no case, no more than the useful design life of the project. Again, looking at the principal forgiveness, our additional subsidization, we provide loan funds and will forgive part of the principal. We do not use the G word, grant, because that would cause our utilities to become subrecipients of the federal government, and we do not want to pass along our lovely reporting requirements to them. So we will do that and offer loans with principal forgiveness. So to apply for a loan, we work with our area development districts and the water management coordinators at each of those 15 ads. To apply, we have an annual funding cycle with a call for projects that starts in October and runs through this year, December 16th. We work with our partners in this funding program, the Kentucky Division of Water, who will rank and score the projects. They'll give us that ranked list, and we do fund in priority order. When our intended use plan comes out, that will give the public an opportunity to comment on the funding and then see who will be invited to apply. And finally, looking at the domestic preference manufacturing, something new that was included in bill is BABA. So I don't know. I thought we couldn't have more acronyms, and apparently we can. So Build America, Buy America increases the American iron and steel requirement for our funding to also include manufactured products and construction materials. And so any project that has funding from the directly through bill will also include the requirements for BABA. And I guess we'll take questions at the end. Thank you all very much.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here today and talk to you about the monumental changes that bill funding is going to bring to the Kentucky Division of Abandoned Mine Lands. And you know, change, as I drove down here this morning, I was thinking about change in general. And one of my thoughts was sometimes change is a little scary. I know that I used to tell my kids, and a lot of you can relate to this, I think, I said, never get in a car with a stranger, right? And then when the internet came along and they started to use the internet, I said, never meet anyone from the internet. And then one night my son called me when he was having car trouble in another city, and the last thing I told him was it's probably best if you use the Uber app to get a ride home. And as I hung up, I thought, Jim, you just told your kid to contact a stranger through the internet and have him come with the car and pick him up. So, tell you a little bit about the Kentucky Division of Abandoned Mine Lands. We are a small but a mighty organization. We have about 63 employees today. And a lot of folks here probably know what we do, but a lot probably do not. And so some of the things that we do are we fix landslides, all kinds of old reclamation problems. We've closed over the years thousands of mine portals and dangerous openings, and we continue to do those things every day for the citizens of the coal fields of Kentucky. Other things that we do, we remediate environmental hazards like acid mine drainage, coal refuse piles, coal seam fires, and we administer the AMLR program Secretary alluded to earlier, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but I will mention it a little farther on. So there are lots of things that we do. The green button. Wow. So we have basically two streams of funding, and as I said, we are 100% federally funded. The first one is our regular AML grant, and this grant through the years has been as high as $35 million, and as you see here, a few lines down there, our grant this year, 2022, is $8.9 million. So we've had some tough times lately with our annual grant. And then the AMLR grant funds, which people get confused about that. Citizens especially get confused about it. They see a newspaper article or a news show on TV that talks about, wow, Kentucky just got $25 million in AML funding. And so they call our regional office and they say, hey, that problem that we had that you said you'd fix when you had more funding, we expect you to be out here next week. And I have to explain to them that those are economic revitalization grants that are administered by AML, and that pot of money can't be used for regular reclamation. So I talked about monumental change, and for me to explain the monumental change that's going to happen with the Kentucky Division of Abandoned Mine Lands, I need to give you just a little bit of context and a little bit of history. If I could take you back to 1977, that's when SMCRA was passed. That's the Surface Mine Control and Reclamation Act of 1977. And SMCRA authorized the AML fund, which is the source of our annual grants, and the AML fee, which is an assessment on every ton of coal produced in the United States. Those fees go into the AML fund, and once a year, grants are handed out to the states and tribes that are eligible. The amounts of those annual grants are calculated using a formula that considers historic coal production and current coal production. So we all know that Kentucky has a great history of historic coal production. So that's always been a solid number for us. And in the years following SMCRA, the 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s, we had some strong coal production there. But in about 2010, as has been referenced earlier today, we saw a steep decline in current coal production, and so we've seen steep declines in our annual grants. And just to give you, I told you a while ago, in my 16-year career, I have seen a nearly $35 million annual grant. And in 2019, our annual grant was $18.3 million. 2020 was 11.3, 2021 9.2, and 2022 $8.9 million. So that has seriously impacted us. And also, our program, if it had not been extended by the bill infrastructure legislation, it would have ended on September 30th, 2021. So as we were looking toward that date, we had to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So we had to tighten our belts. We had to do value engineering. We had to change the way that we do business. Thank goodness that it was extended through bill infrastructure. What a great thing. That was a big, yeah, all right, we're still in business. And then also with bill infrastructure came, some big money. Okay, the green button. There we go. A little bit of a delay. So, before bill infrastructure passed, we thought we might not even have a program anymore. We might go into the sunset part of our program. Our annual grants are so low that we might not be able to do anything anyway. And then we found out that bill infrastructure was going to give us $74.253 million a year for 15 years. With 5 more years at the end to spend that out. And you know what that means, don't you? We're cooking with gas now. Look out. All that belt tightening and all of those things that we went through for those years leading up to that, we can now breathe and we could think about the new problems that we have because we have $74.253 million a year for the next 15 years. But those are good problems. With that 15 years and 5 more, effectively a 20-year program with $1.1 billion. So what are we going to be able to do? Right now, our known inventory of eligible AML sites is over $900 million. That's a big number. One of the things that this money is going to require us and allow us to do is to reassess our existing inventory. And we're going to be able to complete more abandoned mine lands reclamation projects than ever before, maybe more than in our history up to this point. Who knows? It's going to be big times. We're going to be able to tackle projects that we have known the problems existed, but we haven't had the money to even begin to think about completing those projects. There's a mine fire in Pike County that's been burning for years. And we just haven't had the funding to tackle it. So that's one of the projects that hopefully we'll be able to move ahead with bill funding. Something to dovetail into some of the things Sandy was talking about was that we're going to be able to implement a much more robust water supply replacement program. We've always done this. We have always funded projects to work on water supplies in areas where the water supply was contaminated by pre-law coal mining, but now we're going to be able to up those numbers. And all of these projects that I've talked about are going to be bid out, and contractors are going to complete these. So there are going to be a lot of people put to work through the implementation of these projects. Let's try that again. So imagine that you live in Blackberry, Pike County, Kentucky, and there, on both sides of the creek there are terrible AML problems. And we've been there and worked quite a bit. But now we're going to be able to go in there and do a community project where we don't just assess one site and do a project, but we're going to do these community projects. that will take care of all the problems there. That's going to be a big win. If you'd like more information about any of these things, you are welcome to look at our website. A lot of information there. On that one, you can actually fill out. Well, I went a little bit too far. That's an awesome looking landslide repair, though. So I really appreciate the time here. I'd like to introduce Dennis Hatfield, the Director of the Division of Oil and Gas. Give him a great big hand. Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to speak to this group, and we appreciate the opportunity. I am Dennis Hatfield. We are part of the Division of Oil and Gas, which is part of the Department for Natural Resources within the Energy Cabinet. And we're all speaking today about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So let me just go right into it if we can, if the green button works. And it takes it a little while. But the Secretary mentioned earlier there was a $25 million grant announced by the governor a few weeks back that was specifically targeted to plug orphan wells. That's a big deal. We've never had that kind of money to deal with this problem. So it came with some caveat, and one of them is that we have to obligate 90% of it within 90 days. As Jim says, a little extra money is great, but 90 days is tough. So we've been under the gun to perform. So let me just talk a little bit about why this is significant to you. As soon as this catches up. There we go. Why this is important. Orphan wells are basically abandoned, unplugged oil or gas wells that there's no responsible party left to plug. Kentucky's orphan wells, they're covered up. You don't necessarily just see them beside the road. They're covered up by woodlands and vegetation, roads, sometimes residential development, but there are a lot out there. Some of them are just a nuisance, but others are an active risk to the environment and even to safety in some occasions. So these are found, this is about communities. These are found in communities, croplands, woodlands, backyards even, you'll see, tourism sites and state forest, creeks and rivers. The majority of these orphan wells were drilled and abandoned what we call pre-law. Pre-law means generally between 1860s and 1960s, before there were any state requirements and guidelines regarding bonding and plugging. So they're an issue that is a legacy issue. Now, how this affects you. Orphan wells impact the majority of our Kentucky counties, actually about 85. The highest density of orphan wells are found in 3 areas: East Kentucky, Lee, Estill, Powell, Magoffin counties, or in South Central Kentucky, Clinton, Cumberland, Greene, Warren, or West Kentucky, and key, again, Ohio, Davies, Henderson. Sometimes they're just an abstraction, a nuisance. Sometimes they're leaking crude oil or brines, leaking natural gas. They can affect our water resources, our land, our soil, and air quality. And the longer they're left unaddressed, the greater the problem they can become. They deteriorate, and they adversely affect where people live. So, where would you find orphan wells? Well, you will find them in the creeks. You got to remember that before there were roads, people traveled the creeks. You'll find them in the crops, farm country. You will find them at the barn at the end of the day. You will find them at the house when you pull in the evening, front porch or back porch. You will find them around town, Whitley County. The other one's the main street of Fordsville. You just never know. By the way, the well is in the planter. in the picture to my far left. But, you know, if you got one and you can't do anything else with it, decorate around it. You know? The well is in the planter. I thought that was so cool. And then, you know, folks, at the end, when you go rest high on that mountain, you're going to see some orphan wells there. Well, now you necessarily won't see them, you know. You'll be in that land of eternal rest with no orphan wells, but the rest of us will see them. They'll be there. So, you know, we have to deal with these. You will see they touch every part of people's lives. Church, home, farm, residence. So, once we were issued that approval of an initial grant, the division got to work and pushed as hard as we could. And I won't bother with all these numbers, but we've put out over 40 RFP packages in different counties. Over 600 wells have been are in the process of being contracted out for plugging because we're under a 90-day deadline with this specific grant. And so far to date, we've plugged over 30 wells in Christian, Davies, Henderson, and Lee counties just so far. This is a map that kind of gives you a visual of the first 40-some packages, phases 1 through 5, and you can see the areas starting to kind of fill out, basically East Kentucky, South Central Kentucky, and Western Kentucky. Those are all counties that packages either have been awarded or are out for bid or being contracted at this time. So it's a pretty broad area. We're trying to hit as many affected, impacted areas and communities as we can. And as we progress on this initial grant work, there's a lot going on. The Commissioner knows we've had people working nights and weekends trying to make this happen. Contractors have 6 to 12 months to plug the first 17 RFPs because we're trying to make an impact out there now. Other packages, they have 12 to 18 months, and once these wells are contracted, remember we have 90 days to get it all contracted, or 90% of it. Once they're contracted, we actually have time to spend it, so these packages we've tried to spread out over some time. And with other plugging grants on the horizon ahead, as you can see, there are, and the Secretary mentioned there's a formula grant out there that could potentially be another $79 million. We hope that it arrives, but we're going to hopefully make this a highly successful 5-year program. That's our goal if the funding comes forth. And while this initiative will not plug all of Kentucky's orphan wells, it will accomplish much good for our citizens and our communities and for the environment. And for the folks that go home at the end of the day, some sit under the oak tree by the orphan well. And the Conleys in Webster County, I love that. You decorate around it and put a sign up, you know. Welcome to our house. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone on the panel, for providing background information that is very critical and helpful for all of us here. I did want to highlight that if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the Ask a Question section on the app. But we do have one here. I know Sandy had to step out for a moment, but I have one here for you, Dennis. It says, is there a public-facing tool that provides spatial data on where orphan wells are located, and are all of them tracked in the state?
What we are able to track to this point, is this working? 1, 2. Are abandoned wells. KRS, or revised statutes, changed, and for that reason we have to do a specific study to identify that a well is an orphan well. So that is in the process of accumulation. We don't have a map today of them. What we do identify is where there are abandoned wells, and then you do a specific study of the wells to see that there is no remaining responsible operator. So the mapping is an effort underway, what we have to this point is abandoned wells that are under study that very likely are or will become orphan wells. So that's, over time, we're hoping the mapping will improve to that extent, Victoria.
Okay, thank you for that. And will that mapping over time be produced and available public facing?
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of work going right now to set up our websites and our visual that everybody can see what's going on.
Great, and I'll just add at the Department of Energy, the same is occurring. So we've set up a Bipartisan Infrastructure Law webpage that has a lot of resources. Our website we've shared as regional specialists coming from the outside looking in can be a bit clunky and a bit wonky, but we're really working hard to ensure that you all get all the resources that are available and have all the information and access to webinars. So you aren't alone in that regard, Dennis. Yes.
I have a question for you, and I hope everybody can hear me. I've noticed in reviewing some of the bipartisan infrastructure law and in reviewing IRA that when people talk about Justice 40 and they talk about environmental justice and they talk about coal-impacted communities and use phrases like that, that sometimes the definitions are a bit different. And I'm wondering if on the federal level, if people are recognizing that from cabinet to cabinet, there may be some difference in those definitions and how we're going to maybe unify those.
Yeah, that's a great question, Secretary. And I am not of the pay grade to be in those conversations per se, but I know that when we have discussions as regional specialists with our stakeholders, that is something that comes up, and we elevate that to leadership. I will highlight the interagency working group on coal communities. I've shortened that that group. They have been incredibly impactful in Appalachia, and it is a broad scope of representatives, or encompasses a broad scope of representatives from different departments and agencies to have those types of discussions when we're thinking about collectively just within the Appalachian region, you know, how communities are being identified and the language we're using so that everyone at least has a common understanding of what's available for each of the stakeholders. So that's definitely something that needs to be continue to be worked out, but just know the conversations are happening, and hopefully through the IWG and other entities across the country, we can have that commonplace understanding of what is defined under Justice 40 and how we can really get the resources to communities that need it most. All right, and I see we had 2 questions here for you, Sandy. So welcome back. The first is, are solar projects eligible for the KIA funding?
Most of, or the largest pieces of our funding are specifically identified for water or sewer projects. We do have one smaller loan fund that has the ability to fund infrastructure. So if there was funding available and the borrower was a governmental entity, we could potentially look at doing solar projects.
And I have one more question for you. Are there resources available to help communities with applying for the KIA funds, and where are these applications due?
I would say the biggest resource available to any of the community water systems and wastewater systems is at your area development district. They have been a huge help with all of the funding, not just Bill, but the ARPA funding and our regular base funding. And we have a partnership with those area development districts and the water management coordinators. And the applications are due. So we have, during the funding cycle, we have a call for projects where we accept projects between October and this year it's December 16th. And the Division of Water will rank those, and then we will invite projects that are on the fundable list in rank order.
Great, and I kind of want to pose that question to others on the panel. I know at the Department of Energy, this is monumental investment in funding, and so we've really been trying to ensure that all of our stakeholders have the most up-to-date information. I myself, working with my colleagues across the country, have set in on community groups. I've been at Reimagine Appalachia meetings. I've met with local mayors. I've met with folks in the governor's office to ensure that they have the access to materials and know the funding deadline. So it's a big challenge. This is a lot of money, and I think all of us in this room want to make sure that it is distributed and implemented correctly, so that this investment is going to be for the long haul and not just a short term, it's a long term. So I love to pose to Dennis and Brian and Jim, how are you all working internally and sometimes with really small teams? I hear that a lot at the federal level. I don't know how you all are doing amazing work with such little staff, so hats off to you. But how are you ensuring that all communities, especially those, disadvantaged communities, those in transitioning energy communities, are really understanding what it takes and what's needed and have all the resources they can to make the best decisions?
Well, I'll say in our program, we do get a lot of help from our state agencies. Kentucky in particular has a very, I would say, customer-facing approach. It's really hard for us to reach rural communities on our own. And sometimes there's also a level of, I would say, distrust there. So it helps to have people in the middle, I guess I would say, that can make those connections and, help them identify what issues they're facing and try and help put them on the course towards solving those.
We have been reassessing our inventory as I talked. We've also been going back through projects that have been designed in the past, prioritizing them and starting to implement those projects. And then I touched a little while ago on community projects. That's going to be a big push to go out into these communities who are impacted by the same types of problems. Instead of working on one place, we're going to solicit from those folks the problems that are in their area, so we can identify things that haven't been reported to us yet and aggregate those sites and hopefully do some awesome projects with that affect a lot of people for good and not just some pinpoints across a map, but some huge community projects will be fun.
orphanwells@ky.gov. If anybody has an orphan well problem, they can use that email address to alert it and bring it to our attention. Obviously, wells are fixed assets, so they are where they are. We have 16 field inspectors across the state, and what they do is individually assess their area because they live there, and we try to hit the highest impacted areas. People that have dealt with this problem a long time, and they've been waiting on help, and we try to maintain our list, and they're working toward trying to hit those most impacted folks. It's time they got the right attention. So we are certainly trying to hit the priority areas, the most heavily impacted areas, and we'll continue that effort.
Well, that's a great way to end our panel. I just want to thank each of the panelists again. Please applause for them and all the hard work they're doing. And we will be here throughout the day, so please do not hesitate to contact us to learn more. And thank you again for this opportunity.